He told 400 employees I was dead weight collecting a pension. I held the only EPA remediation license, keeping his father's $3.4 billion pipeline network legal. I remember the folding chairs. That's the detail that sticks with me for some reason. 400 of them, arranged in neat rows across the main warehouse floor at Caulfield Energy's Midland headquarters. The kind of chairs you see at church fundraisers and high school graduations. Uncomfortable, temporary. The company had never done an all-hands town hall before, not once in 18 years. So when the email went out Monday afternoon, mandatory attendance, Tuesday at 2 p.m., exciting update on our path forward, I knew something was off. I sat in the third row. I'm not a back-of-the-room guy. Never have been. If someone's going to say something that affects my life, I want to see their face when they say it. Bryce Caulfield was at the podium, 26 years old. Navy sport coat, no tie, hair styled like he was about to film a LinkedIn video. He had a clicker in one hand and a slide deck behind him with words like cultural velocity and optimizing the human capital footprint. He'd been COO for 6 weeks. Before that, he'd spent 10 months rotating through departments he never meaningfully contributed to. He called it his learning tour. The rest of us called it what it was. He was talking about operational drag, about legacy overhead, and right-sizing the cost structure. His voice had that practiced steadiness, the kind they teach you in business school presentation labs. Controlled, measured, completely disconnected from anything real. Then he pointed toward my section of the audience, toward the compliance department. And frankly, he said, we've been carrying dead weight, people collecting a pension who haven't contributed a new idea in years. That changes today. He looked right at me when he said it. Made sure I saw 400 people in folding chairs, and the room went silent. Not the polite silence of agreement. The sick silence of people watching something they know is wrong and not knowing what to do about it. I didn't flinch. I didn't look around to see who was staring. I looked at my hands. They were steady. I thought about Kuwait, 1996, 4 a.m., neutralizing a ruptured chemical storage drum in 115-degree heat, while 3 other guys were frozen, just standing there, waiting for someone to tell them what to do. I thought about how panic looks on people who've never been in a situation they couldn't talk their way out of. I thought, I have survived worse than a 26-year-old with a haircut. My name is Garrett Allen Sykes. I'm 51 years old. I spent 13 years in the United States Army Chemical Corps, where my job was hazardous materials operations and remediation. I cleaned up chemical messes for the Army for 13 years. Then, I cleaned up environmental messes for Caulfield Energy Partners for 18. Different uniform, same work. My title was Vice President of Environmental Compliance. I held the company's EPA-issued Remediation Project Manager certification, RPM, in federal shorthand. That credential is issued under 40 CFR, Part 300, the National Contingency Plan. It is issued to an individual, not to a company, not to a department, to a person by name. Every active consent, decree, and remediation agreement Caulfield Energy had with the EPA, all 97 of them, across 9 states and $3.4 billion in pipeline infrastructure, named one RPM of record. Garrett Allen Sykes, not Caulfield Energy Partners, not the Office of the Vice President. Me. When I joined Caulfield, I was 33, 3 years out of the Army, 2 years with an EPA subcontractor running remediation sites in the Gulf states. Caulfield's compliance department was 4 people handling 11 consent decrees. By the time Bryce Caulfield pointed at me in that warehouse and called me dead weight, I had built it into a 12-person operation managing 97 active decrees across 9 states. Every protocol, every inspection schedule, every reporting chain, every relationship with every regional EPA office, from Corpus Christi to Wheeling, West Virginia. I did that work the way I learned to do everything in the chemical corps. Slow, methodical, right. You don't rush a chemical neutralization. You do it right, or you do it twice, or you don't do it at all. The certification came in my 3rd year. I remember the night I got the letter. I was sitting in a Hampton Inn in Midland, Texas. Room smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and burnt coffee from the lobby machine. I was on the phone with Connor, my son, 4 years old at the time, trying to explain that Daddy couldn't come home yet because Daddy had to finish something important at work. He didn't cry. He just got quiet. That silence was worse. Connor's 17 now, lives with my ex-wife Linda in Tulsa. I pay $1,400 a month in alimony. I see Connor every other weekend and summers. He plays varsity baseball, shortstop, good glove, patient at the plate. He talks about studying environmental engineering because of Dad. Every time he says that, something in my chest does a thing I don't have a word for. I missed his 8th birthday for a pipeline remediation emergency in Louisiana. A 36-inch crude line had contaminated a wetland adjacent to a wildlife refuge, and the EPA gave us 72 hours before they escalated to criminal referral. I was the only certified RPM. There was no one else to send. I missed my own father's funeral. January 2019, a Monday. Burial was at 10 a.m. at Greenwood Cemetery in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. I was in Corpus Christi because 3 EPA inspectors were arriving at noon for a surprise compliance audit on a terminal remediation site that had been flagged for groundwater migration. If I wasn't there, the consent decree for that site would have triggered a default notice. 14 jobs depended on that site staying operational. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I chose this work. I'd choose it again. But the choice has a price. And Bryce Caulfield was about to find out there's a different kind of price attached to it. If you've ever had a boss who didn't understand what you actually do, hit that like button and subscribe. 3 months before the town hall, I started hearing things. Not rumors, specifics. Bryce had been making noise in his department rotations about trimming legacy overhead. He used that phrase in a leadership meeting Mel Carter attended. Mel's my senior environmental engineer. Been my direct report for 11 years. Solid. Dependable. Knows the remediation systems almost as well as I do. Almost. Mel doesn't hold the RPM certification. Nobody at Caulfield does, except me. The certification process takes 18 to 24 months minimum, requires direct federal EPA review, and demands a documented history of supervised remediation project management. You can't expedite it. You can't buy it. You can't delegate it. When Mel told me Bryce had specifically mentioned the compliance department as the most obvious place to start cutting, I didn't panic. I don't panic. I went home that evening, poured 3 fingers of Woodford Reserve, sat on the back deck, and called Dale Whitfield. Dale and I served together. Chemical Corps, Fort Leonard Wood, 1993 through 1997. He's 53 now. Partner at Whitfield and Reed Environmental Law in Houston. Specializes in federal environmental regulatory enforcement and EPA consent decree compliance. He's been my personal attorney for 9 years. Not because I was planning for this, because when you've spent a career working inside federal regulatory frameworks, you keep a lawyer who understands them. I told Dale what I was hearing, not what had happened. Nothing had happened yet, just the direction of the wind. Dale was quiet for about 10 seconds. Then he said 7 words. That license is yours, not theirs. I said I knew that. No, he said. I mean, pull the actual filing. EPA Form 1900-14. RPM Designation and Certification of Record. Filed under your personal federal credentials number. Cross-referenced in all 97 active consent decrees. They can't reassign it, Garrett. They can't transfer it. They can't fake it. It's yours. He paused. And Garrett, check your employment agreement. The original one. section on IP assignment and regulatory credentials. I checked it that night, pulled it from the fireproof box in my closet. 18 years old, the paper slightly yellowed at the edges. I read the IP assignment clause 3 times. There wasn't one. No IP assignment clause covering regulatory certifications. No transfer of credential language. No corporate ownership provision for federally issued professional licenses. The employment agreement addressed trade secrets, proprietary data, client lists, standard corporate language. But the RPM certification, the single credential that every consent decree, every remediation agreement, every operating permit in a 9-state pipeline network depended on, wasn't mentioned anywhere. I called Dale back. "I know," he said. "I already pulled your employment agreement from the copy you sent me in 2016. There's nothing in it. The certification is yours. The consent decrees name you personally. And if you're separated from the company without a qualified successor in place, every single active decree goes into automatic non-compliance within 14 calendar days." I sat there on my back deck, listening to the cicadas, looking at the last of the bourbon in my glass. "So, what do I do?" I said. "Nothing," Dale said. "You don't do a single thing. You go to work. You do your job. You let them make their move. And if they're dumb enough to make it, you call me. Not before, not during, after." That was 3 months before the town hall. Tuesday at 2 p.m., Bryce Caulfield called me dead weight in front of 400 people. By 2:45, the town hall was over. People filed out in that shuffling, head-down way people move when they've just witnessed something ugly and don't want to be the next target. A few looked at me. Most didn't. At 4:15 p.m., I was in a windowless conference room on the 2nd floor. HR had a folder open on the table. Bryce wasn't there. He'd delegated the paperwork. Sent a woman named Janet from Human Resources who couldn't quite meet my eye. The folder said involuntary termination without cause on the tab. Janet explained the terms. 60 days severance. Benefits through end of month. Standard non-disparagement clause. She spoke carefully, like she was reading a script someone had written for her, and she didn't agree with a single word of it. I read every page. Slowly, I signed where they asked me to sign. "I'm sorry, Garrett," Janet said. "I understand," I said. I stood up. I picked up my personal effects box. They'd already packed it. A coffee mug from Connor's Little League team. A framed photo from the Kuwait deployment. The pen Randall Caulfield had given me when we closed the 50th consent decree. Silver, with my initials engraved on the clip. I walked out through the lobby. Badge deactivated. Doors held open by a security guard who'd known me for 15 years and wouldn't look at me. I put the box in the back seat of my truck. Sat behind the wheel. Didn't start the engine. At 4:47 p.m., I called Dale Whitfield. He picked up on the first ring, like he'd been waiting. "They did it," I said. Dale was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "Good. If you've ever had a boss who didn't understand what you actually do, hit that like button and subscribe." Good is not a word most people use when their friend just got fired. But Dale Whitfield isn't most people. Dale spent 11 years neutralizing chemical ordnance for the United States Army, and another 20 navigating federal regulatory law. He doesn't waste words on sympathy when there's work to do. "Tell me exactly what the termination letter says," he said. I read it to him over the phone. Sitting in my truck in the Caulfield Energy parking lot, engine off, windows down, reading the language word by word while the afternoon heat pressed in through the cab. "Involuntary termination without cause," Dale repeated. "Effective immediately." That's what it says? That's what it says. They didn't cite performance, didn't cite misconduct, didn't cite restructuring with a defined successor plan. No. "Garrett, I need you to do exactly 3 things tonight. Write them down." I pulled a pen from the center console, the silver pen, Randall's pen. I wrote on the back of the severance summary. First, Do not contact anyone at Caulfield. Not Mel, not Frank Dobbins, not Randall. Nobody. You are no longer an employee, and anything you say can be characterized as interference with corporate operations. Understood? Second, draft a formal notification letter to the EPA Region 6 office, copying the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance, stating that Garrett Allen Sykes, RPM of record under EPA Form 1900-14, has been involuntarily separated from Caulfield Energy Partners effective today's date, and that to your knowledge, no qualified successor, RPM, has been designated or approved. That's it? That's it. You're not threatening anything. You're not demanding anything. You're fulfilling your professional obligation to notify the regulatory authority that the named credential holder is no longer affiliated with the entity of record. It's required under the consent decree language. You'd actually be in violation if you didn't send it. I almost smiled at that. Almost. Third, Dale said, send it certified mail, return receipt requested, and send a duplicate via the EPA's electronic compliance portal. Timestamp everything. I want a paper trail that would make a federal auditor weep with joy. What happens after that? After that, you go inside, feed the dog, pour yourself 3 fingers of the good stuff, and wait. The 14-day clock starts the moment EPA receives your notification. Caulfield has 14 calendar days to produce a federally certified RPM of record to maintain compliance on all 97 active consent decrees. They don't have one. The certification process takes 18 to 24 months. The math does the rest. I sat in that truck for another 5 minutes after I hung up. The parking lot was emptying out. I could see Bryce Caulfield's BMW in the reserved spot near the front entrance. A black X5 with a Columbia Business School alumni sticker on the rear window. I am not making that up. I started the engine and drove home. Wednesday at 9 a.m., I sent the letter. Certified mail to EPA Region 6. Electronic duplicate through the compliance portal. 4 pages. Clean. Factual. No editorial language. Dale reviewed every word before I sent it. By 3:30 p.m. Wednesday, the EPA had acknowledged receipt. An automated confirmation from the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance, stamped with a case reference number and a compliance review tracking code. The 14-day clock started ticking, and then I did exactly what Dale told me to do. Nothing. I fed Rex, poured 3 fingers of Woodford Reserve, sat on the back deck and watched the sun go down over Midland. Called Connor that evening. He already knew something was wrong, because teenagers can sense a shift in their parents the way animals sense weather. He didn't ask directly. He just said, "You coming to my game Saturday?" I said yes. First time in 3 months, I'd said yes to a Saturday game without checking my work calendar first. Cool, Connor said. That was it. Cool. Wednesday passed. Thursday morning is when the world inside Caulfield Energy Partners began to end. At 7:15 a.m. Thursday, Mel Carter was at his desk. He'd arrived early, the way he always did. Coffee from the vending machine, checking the EPA regulatory bulletin feed he'd been subscribed to for 9 years. A new entry had posted overnight. Compliance review initiated. Caulfield Energy Partners, LP. RPM designation lapse. Active consent, decrees 1-97. Mel read it twice. Then he stood up, walked down the hall, and put his head into Frank Dobbins' office. Frank was already there. General Counsel. 22 years with the company. 58 years old with the posture of a man who carries other people's mistakes on his back. He had a mug of coffee that had gone cold and a stack of contracts he'd been reviewing since 6. "Frank," Mel said, "you need to see this." Frank read the bulletin. He read it again. Then he set his coffee down very carefully. The way you set something down when your hands have started shaking, and you don't want anyone to notice. "When was Garrett terminated?" Frank asked. "Tuesday, 4:15. "Who approved it?" "Bryce." "Did Bryce consult legal before the termination?" No. Did Bryce consult the board? No. Did anyone in this building review Garrett's employment agreement, his EPA certification status, or the consent decree RPM designation language before they walked a 51-year-old man with 18 years of service out the front door? Mel didn't answer. He didn't need to. Frank pulled up the EPA Master Services Agreement on his screen. He found the RPM clause in under 90 seconds. He read the named individual certification requirement. He read the automatic non-compliance trigger. He read the 14-day remediation window. Then he opened Garrett's employment agreement, the original from 18 years ago, scanned and filed in the legal archive. He searched for an IP assignment clause covering regulatory certifications. Nothing. He searched for a transfer of credential provision. Nothing. He searched for any language at all, that would give Caulfield Energy Partners a claim to the RPM certification held by Garrett Allen Sykes. Nothing. Frank Dobbins closed his laptop. He pressed both palms flat on his desk. He said 2 words, quietly, to no one in particular. "Oh no." Then he said it again, even quieter, like a man who has just realized the building he is standing in has no foundation. "Oh no." Mel told me later that Frank then did something Mel had never seen in 11 years at the company. Frank Dobbins stood up, grabbed his jacket, and ran. Actually ran. Down the corridor, past the break room, past the glass-walled conference rooms and the framed photos of pipeline openings and the motivational posters Bryce had put up during his first week as COO, straight to Randall Caulfield's corner office on the 4th floor. Mel texted me at 7:38 a.m. I still have the message. Frank Dobbins just actually ran past my office. Whatever you did, it's working. I didn't respond. I was on my back deck with Rex and a cup of black coffee, watching the sprinklers next door sweep back and forth across a brown lawn. Frank reached Randall's office at 7:42 a.m. Randall was already in. He was always in by 7. Old school Texas energy man. Built Caulfield from a single pipeline right-of-way in 1989. 67 years old. Still wore boots to the office. Still kept a framed topo map of the original Permian Basin route on his wall. Frank closed the door. He did not sit down. "We have a situation," Frank said. "What kind?" "Your nephew fired Garrett Sykes on Tuesday." "I know. Bryce briefed me. Said it was part of the restructuring." "Randall, did you review the termination before it happened?" "I trusted Bryce's judgment." Frank paused. I imagine this is the moment where 22 years of professional restraint fought against every instinct Frank Dobbins had. Garrett Sykes holds the only EPA-issued remediation project manager certification linked to this company, Frank said. It's a personal federal credential. It is not assignable. It is not transferable. It is named in every single one of our 97 active consent decrees as the RPM of record. His employment agreement contains no IP assignment clause covering regulatory certifications. That is an omission I will describe, for the record, as catastrophic. Randall didn't move. Garrett sent formal notification to the EPA yesterday morning that he has been involuntarily separated from this company. The 14-day compliance clock is now running. We have 12 days to produce a federally certified replacement RPM, or every active consent decree defaults to non-compliance. The certification process takes 18 to 24 months. Silence. "We don't have a replacement," Frank said. "We can't get one. We can't fake one. We can't buy one. 12 days from now, the EPA will have legal authority to suspend operations on every remediation-linked pipeline segment in our network." Randall Caulfield sat behind the same desk he'd had since 1989. An oak desk, scarred and heavy, that had survived 3 oil busts and a hurricane. He looked at Frank Dobbins the way a man looks at a doctor who has just said a word he wasn't expecting to hear. How much exposure? Randall said. If every remediation-linked asset loses coverage and insurance revokes on the environmental liability policies, which they will because the non-compliance trigger is an automatic exclusion in our carrier contract, we're looking at $890 million in uninsured environmental liability across 9 states. $890 million. Yes. At 8:23 a.m., Randall Caulfield picked up his phone and called me for the first time. I watched his name appear on my screen. I was sitting on my back deck. Rex was lying across my feet. The coffee had gone cold. I let it ring. 4 times. 5, 6. Voicemail. I set the phone down on the armrest, face down, and scratched Rex behind the ears. That was the first call. There would be 22 more over the next 11 days. I didn't answer a single one. Click. Inside Caulfield Energy Partners, the next 11 days unfolded like a slow-motion structural failure, the kind you study in engineering textbooks. The kind where every load-bearing element gives way in sequence because someone removed the one piece that was holding everything together. Mel kept me updated. I never asked him to. He just did it. Terse texts, usually late at night after his kids were in bed, written with the grim precision of a man documenting a disaster from inside the building. Day 3. Bryce held a leadership meeting. Said the EPA thing is a clerical issue. Used the phrase administrative noise. Frank Dobbins sat in the corner and didn't say a word. His face looked like wet cement. Day 5. Legal retained an outside firm. Kirkland. 3 partners flew in from Houston. They spent 4 hours reviewing the consent decree language. One of them asked who approved the termination without a regulatory impact assessment. Nobody answered. Day 7. Bryce tried to contact the EPA directly to explain the transition. Frank physically intercepted him in the hallway. I've never seen Frank raise his voice before. Today, I did. Day 9. HR posted a job listing for an RPM Certified Environmental Compliance Director. Salary, $400,000. Signing bonus, $150,000. Applications received, 0. There are 11 people in the United States with active RPM certification at the level required for Caulfield's consent decree portfolio. Mel Carter knows this because Mel Carter once helped me compile that list for an internal risk assessment Bryce never read. Day 11. Randall hasn't left the building in 3 days. Sleeps on the couch in his office. Bryce's BMW hasn't been in the parking lot since day 8. Day 14. The clock ran out. The EPA issued emergency suspension orders on 31 pipeline segments across 4 states. Not a warning. Not a preliminary finding. Suspension. Immediate cessation of remediation-linked operations, pending designation of a qualified RPM of record and full compliance review. 31 segments. Exposed gathering lines, transmission interconnects, and terminal facilities accounting for roughly 40% of Caulfield's total throughput network. Every one of them linked to an active consent decree that now read, in federal regulatory language, non-compliant, responsible party designation lapsed. Day 16. Caulfield's insurance carrier, Meridian Specialty Underwriters, invoked the automatic exclusion clause in the environmental liability policy. Non-compliance with federal consent decree obligations constituted a material breach of policy conditions. Coverage revoked, effective immediately. $890 million in environmental liability. Uninsured. Mel's text that night was 3 words. It's all gone. Days 17 through 19. 3 state attorneys general, Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma, opened parallel investigations into Caulfield Energy's consent decree compliance failures. Not because they were looking for trouble, because the EPA suspension orders were public filings. Because environmental noncompliance on pipeline infrastructure is the kind of thing that makes a state AG's office very attentive, very fast. Because $890 million in uninsured liability sitting across your state's watershed tends to focus the legal mind. I watched all of this from my back deck in Midland. Rex at my feet. Woodford Reserve in the evening. Black coffee in the morning. Connor's baseball schedule pinned to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a Texas flag. I went to his game on Saturday. Drove up to Tulsa Friday night. Slept in the guest room Linda keeps for my visits. Civil, not warm, exactly as it's always been. Saturday morning, Connor and I got breakfast at a diner off Route 75. Vinyl booths, old waitress who called everyone Han. Connor ordered pancakes and told me about a girl in his AP chemistry class who could name every element on the periodic table from memory. That's a good skill, I said. You seem different, he said. Different how? Less tired. Like you're actually here when you're here. I looked at my son across that table. 17 years old, sharp eyes, patient at the plate, wants to study environmental engineering because of me. I'm here, I said. That afternoon, I watched him field 6 grounders at shortstop without an error. Went 2 for 3 at the plate. Line drive to left center in the 4th that scored 2 runs. I didn't check my phone once. On day 21, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Houston area code. It was Margaret Sinclair, CEO of Trident Midstream Partners, 54 years old, former EPA Region 6 administrator. She didn't waste time on small talk. Garrett, I've been watching what's happening at Caulfield. I imagine you have too. I have. I'd like to offer you the position of Director of Environmental Strategy at Trident. Annual compensation of $1.1 million. Equity package valued at $52 million. Vesting over 4 years. Full authority over regulatory compliance across our network. And Garrett, we'd like your guidance on the EPA permit redistribution process for the Caulfield segments currently under suspension. I was quiet for a moment. Not because I was surprised, because I wanted to hear the cicadas. Because I wanted to feel the weight of the offer, the way you feel the weight of something you've earned over 18 years and 13 years before that. I'll have my attorney review the terms, I said. Of course, take your time. I called Dale. He reviewed the offer in 48 hours. Clean, generous, no poison pills. I signed on day 23. On day 24, the Caulfield Energy Partners Board of Directors held an emergency session in the 4th floor conference room. Polished mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Permian Basin. 8 board members present. Randall Caulfield at the head. Bryce Caulfield was asked to attend. He arrived in the Navy sport coat. The hair was still styled, but something behind his eyes had changed. He looked like a man who had Googled his own name that morning and not liked what he found. Mel told me later what happened. He wasn't in the room, but Frank Dobbins told him afterward, and Frank Dobbins does not embellish. Randall spoke first. He did not look at his nephew. I let family cloud my business judgment, Randall said. That ends today. Frank Dobbins then read, aloud and for the record, a summary of the regulatory exposure created by the termination of Garrett Allen Sykes. He read it from a 12-page memorandum he'd prepared over the preceding week. He read every number. 97 consent decrees in non-compliance. 31 pipeline segments suspended. 3 state AG investigations. $890 million in uninsured liability. Coverage revoked by Meridian Specialty Underwriters. And the EPA Region 6 office had formally requested a compliance remediation plan within 30 days, or Caulfield would face administrative penalties beginning at $75,000 per day, per site, per violation. Frank set the memo down. He looked at Bryce. The termination of Garrett Sykes was executed without legal review, without board approval, without regulatory impact assessment, and without consultation with any member of the compliance, legal, or risk management departments, Frank said. The COO appointment itself was never ratified by the full board. It was a unilateral action by the CEO. Randall didn't flinch at that. He'd already done his flinching in private. Bryce spoke. Mel said Frank told him Bryce tried to use the word restructuring, tried to frame it as a strategic decision, tried to say that the compliance department had been over-indexed on a single point of failure, and that the real problem was Caulfield's dependency on one person. Frank interrupted him. That single point of failure managed 97 active consent decrees for 18 years without a single default, a single missed filing, or a single adverse EPA finding. You've been COO for 6 weeks, and you've exposed this company to $890 million in uninsured liability. That is not a restructuring. That is a catastrophe. Silence. Randall called the vote. Motion to remove Bryce Thomas Caulfield as Chief Operating Officer, effective immediately, and to refer the matter to outside counsel for review of potential fiduciary breach. 8-0. Unanimous. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. An industry journal would later describe it as the fastest executive termination in energy sector history. Bryce was escorted from the building by the same security company that had held the door for me 12 days earlier. Mel said he watched from his office window as Bryce walked to the BMW, got in, and sat there for a long time before starting the engine. I don't know what he thought about in that car. I don't particularly care. Over the next 7 months, Caulfield Energy Partners negotiated a settlement with the EPA, $315 million. The consent decrees were restructured. New RPM designations were required for every active site, and the certification process, 18 to 24 months, no shortcuts, meant that Caulfield's operational capacity would be crippled for over a year. Within 14 months of the town hall, Caulfield had lost 73% of its pipeline throughput capacity. Competitors absorbed the volume. Contracts migrated. Clients followed the permits, and the permits followed the people who held the credentials. Several of those permits went to Trident Midstream Partners, my new employer. I advised the EPA on the redistribution process personally, professionally, by the book. The same way I've done everything for 33 years. Randall called me one more time. The 23rd missed call. I was in my new office in Houston when it came through. Corner office, view of the ship channel. A nameplate on the door that read, Garrett A. Sykes, Director of Environmental Strategy. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message this time. 62 seconds. His voice was tired. He said he was sorry. He said he should have known better. He said he hoped I was doing well. I listened to it once. Then I set the phone down. That Sunday evening, I was in Tulsa. Connor had a doubleheader the next day, Memorial Day tournament. We were sitting on Linda's back porch, him with a Gatorade, me with 3 fingers of Woodford Reserve. The sun was going down behind the tree line, and the sky had turned that deep orange you only get in Oklahoma in late spring. Dad, Connor said. Yeah. Are you going to keep coming to my games? I looked at my son. 17. Shortstop. Good glove. Patient at the plate. Everyone I can, I said. He nodded, took a sip of his Gatorade. We sat there and watched the light change. Sometimes the most valuable thing in a building isn't in the building at all. It walks out the front door with a cardboard box and a silver pen and doesn't look back. And the people who let it leave don't realize what they've lost until the foundation starts to crack and the walls start to bow and the whole structure groans under a weight it was never designed to carry alone. Sometimes dead weight turns out to be the only thing holding everything up. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and ring that notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.